Hi everyone, my name is Steve LaWarre. I'm the Director of Horticulture here at Meijer Gardens in Sculpture Park. And we are standing in the beautiful Michigan farm garden. And if you were here right now on this beautiful spring day, you'd be able to smell the lilacs and you'd be able to hear the birds. I can hear the windmill turning behind me, and it's just a great day to be out here at the Michigan farm garden. Today I want to talk about irises. And right now you can see there's a number of different irises that are in bloom. And irises are one of those things that most of us are familiar with. If you do any kind of gardening, you may have irises in your own yards. But they're also really a cool flower. There's some complexity to them that I'd like to talk with you a little bit about. And we'll tear a flower apart and look at what's going on inside. And talk a little bit about how they grow and how you can maybe be more successful in your own yards with irises. So this morning I took just a few minutes and collected a number of the irises that can be found in bloom right now on the grounds of Meijer Gardens. And so we'll get into some of the diversity of flowers here in just a second, but I wanted to just remind everybody how irises grow. So they grow from an underground rhizome, and they're a perennial, so they come back year after year. And most of the time when we plant irises, we usually plant them in the fall. When they start to go dormant, they can be divided, and you can take any kind of piece like you see here, and that can be planted in your own garden, and you'll have some new iris plants. So as you can see, there's an underground rhizome that grows horizontally right under the surface of the soil, and it puts down these white roots. So then at the very front of this rhizome, you can see where the new growth emerges in the spring, and they form these flat, fan-shaped leaf clusters. And it's from the center of each of these fans that the flower buds will emerge. And we'll look at some of those next. All right, so at the gardens here, you'll find a wide variety of irises, and I'll turn this one around so you can see it a little bit better. But this is a real common garden cultivar. It's Siberian iris. All irises are in their own family. It's the Iridaceae family. And there's other familiar flowers that are in that same family. Things like crocus and gladiolus are also in the iris family. They're known for having their flower parts in threes. So there's 3 sepals, 3 petals, that type of thing. And you can see that if you look down from the top, you can see how it's in a triangle. There's 3 sets of each of these flower parts. And the most familiar parts of the flower that are the showy parts there are the sepals and the petals. And some of you may have heard those called sepals and petals, but I always say that it's either sepals and petals or sepals and petals. They're both spelled the same and you can't have it both ways. So it's sepals and petals. And the sepals are part of the flower that are called the falls. Even on some of the big bearded cultivars, these outer 3 what look like petals are actually sepals, and those are the most showy part of the plant. And then on the Siberian iris, you've got these 3 upright, and those are the actual petals. So those are the true petals. So sepals create the falls, the petals are upright, and then if you look, each one of those falls have what looks like a petal right above it. Can you see that? And that's not a petal at all. That is part of the reproductive structure of the flower. And if you think of the main reproductive parts of a flower, the part that produces the pollen, which is the anther, which we'll look at, and then you'll have the part that receives the pollen, which is the pistil. And this is called a modified pistil. So that's modified into 3 parts, and it looks like a petal, so it's deceiving. And then underneath that, you can see the anther, which is what produces the pollen. So you've got sepals on the outside, you've got petals next, and then you've got the flower parts. You've got the anther in the middle of that, and then you've got a petaloid pistil, which is a pistil that mimics a petal. And those are all found in groups of 3. And so as an insect comes to this flower, it's drawn by the falls. There are various indicators. You can see the different colors and the stripes that would pull that insect in. And they would go down the throat of that flower. They would get pollen on their backs, and as they come back out of that, they would rub over that pistil, which is the top of that there. That looks like a petal, and then that would fertilize the flower. So irises are a flower that's very familiar to us, but there's really more that meets the eye, and they're really, really cool. They have a lot more going on than you may think at first glance. So let's take a look at a couple of these other varieties that are here, and you'll see all of those different parts, and you'll see how we've manipulated irises to go from kind of a simple native flower to just the vast varieties of cultivars that you find in the garden. So there's two irises that I want to make sure everybody is familiar with. This one right here is called the yellow flag, and you'll see this growing all over the place right now. And you'll find it in golf course ponds, you'll find it in a number of different areas even here at Meijer Gardens. But this is a non-native iris, and a number of states have put this on the invasive species list, and it's an iris that's rapidly replacing one of our native irises, and I'll show that one to you next. This is a native iris, and you can see it looks a lot like the yellow iris when I hold them side by side. A little bit more of an open flower here, that they're very similar in their structure, they're very similar in their look, except of the drastic different color. The blue flag iris is native, the yellow flag iris is not. And the blue flag is rapidly being replaced because the yellow flag grows in all of the same areas, and it's a little bit more aggressive. It's a beautiful, beautiful iris, but it's choking out a lot of the areas where this blue flag would normally grow. So I just wanted to make people aware of that. If you have a choice, I recommend not planting the yellow flag in your own gardens. But again, with this native blue flag iris, you can see those three, and it's got those different parts, the sepals or the falls, the petals, and then that petaloid pistil. So that's one of our native irises. Now we can take a look at some of the big bearded irises that we've got here at the gardens. And the bearded irises are all hybrids. They're all different cultivars. You can see this one is so dark that it almost looks black. They're called bearded irises because these falls have been bred to have this bristle, this enhanced kind of bearded bristle that's on these. You can see how much bigger and more frilly the petals are at the top there. So again, you've got the sepals, you've got these big petals, and then if I move those aside, get my fingers out of the way, if I move those aside, you can then see where that anther is, and then this, what looks like a petal, is actually the pistil. So again, an insect would work its way down into the throat of that flower and then pollinate that plant. So you can see just a whole variety of types and colors that are available in bearded irises. So this is an absolute beautiful cultivar here. You can see the real prominent beard, this yellow beard that make part of the falls there of that iris. And it's got that really neat kind of brownish, purplish, yellowish, reminds me of a sunset. So that's a really beautiful, beautiful variety. And then this is another hybrid that's kind of a, you can see kind of a transition between the native type, which is here, and then the really hybridized type, which is here. And this is one that's kind of that in-between cultivar. So the last thing that I want to do is I want to take a flower that is past its due, and I want to dig down into this stem a little bit and break this off. Down at the base of this flower is the ovary. So this would, once this is pollinated, this would end up swelling over time and become a large fruit that would then have the seeds in it. So if you have irises in your own yards, pay attention to them. If you leave a couple of the blooms on the plant once they've faded, if you don't cut all of those off, a lot of times you'll see these swell up and create a fruit. And if I cut this in half, And you can see that there's 3 distinct parts of that ovary. And each of those 3 parts of the flower would feed down to one of those 3 sections of the ovary. So these flowers are referred to as 3-meris or 3-parted. And every part of this flower is 3 parts right down to the ovary. And this is where the seeds would be produced within the fruit. So once you're in here tight, you can see that there's 3 sections. There's one section here, then another section straight up, and then another section here. So basically those sections are about 12 o'clock, then about 4 o'clock, and then about 7 o'clock, if you think of it that way. But then those 3 parts would correspond to, the 3 main sets of parts on the flower, which would be up above. So that's the iris family, and the irises that you'll see here at Meijer Gardens. And again, a huge variety of plants. You can find a lot of these out at the Michigan Farm Garden. Some of the irises out here originally came from Lena Meijer, which is really neat. And then we've got these out at the waterfall in the Sculpture Park. You can see them in the along the zigzag bridge in the Japanese garden. So just a wonderful plant that you'll find all over the property here at Meijer Gardens, and I think most of you probably have that in your own yards as well. So thanks for joining us.